Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Neuroscience of Emotional Intelligence. My name is Daniela Kwiatkowski, and I'm the Manager of Training and Development here at MHS, and we are thrilled to be partnering with Choice Magazine to bring you this informative and engaging webinar. I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join us today. Just a few logistics before we get started. You are all on mute. We have a lot of people on the phone today, so we wanted to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, we do want your questions. There is a question pane in the webinar panel on the right-hand side where you can enter your questions. Now a little about who we are for those of you who are meeting us for the first time. Multi-Health Systems is a global publisher of scientifically validated assessments in the clinical, education, public safety, and talent assessment markets. We are located in Toronto, Canada, and have been in business for over 30 years. We publish assessments in over 50 languages and have a presence in 75 countries around the world. So we are truly global. The reason we highlight all of the markets we work in is that we use the same scientific rigor when developing our talent assessments as we do when we develop an assessment in the clinical world, where the stakes are higher. We have to be 100% accurate when developing a test that assesses autism in children, and we use the same process when developing our talent assessments as well. I'd now like to introduce you to our presenter, Adriana Fellipelli. Adriana Fellipelli is the founder and CEO of Fellipelli, a motivational and behavioral assessments company based out of Brazil. She is a seasoned coach and mentor with over 20 years of experience. Adriana is highly experienced in both career transition and organizational consulting and has mentored high-level senior executives, so CEOs, VPs, and directors, in the pharmaceutical, food, insurance, chemical, and finance industries. She has assisted more than 3,000 professionals in a variety of functional areas, including sales, finance, IT, engineering, logistics, communication, and legal. I'm now going to pass it over to Adriana.
Hello everyone, my name is Adriana Fellipelli and we will be together the next hour discussing about neuroscience and emotional intelligence. Our approach about neuro leadership and emotional intelligence is based on a lot of research on neuroscience and also about emotional intelligence and emotional regulations. One of our base is our partnership with Neuro Leadership Institute from David Rock and Lisa Rock. They are the creators about results coaching systems and they are founders of Neuro Leadership Group and Neuro Leadership Institute. The other partner that support us during this process is MHS, that we use emotional intelligence measures to talking about all the behaviors that related with emotion regulations. Why neuroscience is so important in these matters? We can have some insights about the brain. The first one is the brain is a connection machine. The brain makes millions of connections every day. Wild scale, novel connections are energizing. They drive people to want to take actions. When we are unable to make a connection, when we can't think our way out of a problem, we hit an impasse. So the second one is up close, no two brains are alike. Everyone has a unique set of connections for how they think about things. Basic physical and mental functions, like moving a limb, use similar circuits, but thoughts about more subtle issues like goals and motivations involve complex individual sets of circuits. How you solve a problem is just how you would solve a problem. That means that other people are likely to choose quite different mental pathways to get there. This gets us to the third insight. The third insight is related the brain hardwires everything it can. New ideas or behaviors use what is called working memory, which is a very limited resource in the brain. Therefore, the brain prefers to hardwire any behavior, thoughts, or activities that is repeated. So one literally doesn't have to pay it any more attention. Conversations that involve getting people out of autopilot and into more conscious thought take significantly more effort. The fourth item is hardwiring drives automatic perceptions. Our perceptions are driven by deeper hardwired circuits, old habits, much more than by receiving data fresh from the world. As a result, people perceive the world according to their beliefs and attitudes, rather than seeing things as they are or as they could be. The bias we have greatly influences how we make decisions. The fifth item is it's practically impossible to deconstruct our wiring attention itself, and our attention itself creates change in the brain. This means that trying to get rid of circuits by focus on them is ineffective. We often end up straightening them instead. This explains why focus on solutions creates solutions, whereas focus on problems seems to create more awareness of problems instead of focus of solutions. It's easy to create new wiring. The brain is consistently creating new connections. Every time we meet a new person or understand a new idea, we literally create a new map in our brain. Creating new circuits can be quite easy. The key, if we want to create a long-term hardwired circuit, is to pay it lots of attention. The quality and quantity. Quantity, it means the time, it's seconds, of our focus is what changes the brain over time. Now, let's understand a little bit more about the brain, how the brain works really. So we can see a lot of functions here in this picture. The prefrontal cortex is just one of the part of overall cortex. It sits behind the forehead and was the last major brain region to develop during the human evolutionary history. The prefrontal cortex is a measly 4 to 5% of the volume of the rest of the brain. But making decisions and solving problems relies heavily on this small region. That's the region that we are using now to have these conversations. The brain is much more than a thought process machine. Its fundamental purpose is to keep you alive. Every moment, your brain decides if the world around you is dangerous or helpful to this purpose. Sensing either dangers or rewards, even at surprisingly subtle levels, can have a dramatic impact on how and what you think. Automatically, responses to dangers or rewards are thoughts of generally as emotions. Let me explain. Your ability to regulate your emotions instead of being at the mercy of them is central to being effective. As James Gross said in this handbook of emotional regulations, we are both governed by and governors of our emotions. Antonio Damasio, the neuroscience, says something similar also. Emotional experience is connected to a large brain network called the limbic system. The limbic system includes brain regions such as the amygdala, hippocampus, and insula, which are all connected together in various ways. The limbic system scans data streaming in the brain, telling you what you pay attention to and what way you pay attention. Let's understand a little bit more about the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for high-level thinking process such as deciding, understanding, memorizing, inhibiting, and recall. It controls working memory, which is how to hold information in mind in the short term and when you are processing, as I mentioned to you that we are doing now using this presentation. The other thing that we can see in the prefrontal cortex is critical to our daily basis, our day-to-day lives. It is very small and comes with some limitations because the prefrontal cortex is energy very intensive. Every thought takes effort and use up limited resources. While the prefrontal cortex only a few percent of the brain as overall size, as we mentioned before, it uses up a lot of brain's glucose and oxygen resource when we are active. The prefrontal cortex is small and can generally hold about only four pieces of information and once at a time. So it's very important to use your prefrontal cortex very wisely. The prefrontal cortex process information is a serial manner, like a working memory can only do one thing at once, at a time. While you can hold several chunks of information in mind at once, you can perform more than one consciously process at a time when these chunks without impacting performance. The prefrontal cortex is very fuzzy. Our working memory needs just the right neurochemistry to operate at its best. Dr. Amy Armstead from Yale University has referred to prefrontal cortex as the Goldilocks of the brains, needing to not too little, not too much, but just the right amount of neurochemicals to operate most effectively. This is what Armstead refers to us as the invented U influence to dopamine and adrenaline on prefrontal cortisol functions. Too little represents fatigue or boredom. Too much means to the system it stresses out of the control. The prefrontal cortex is easily distracted because we constantly bombarded with distraction, both external and internal with our thoughts. It takes glucose and energy every time we manage these distractions, leaving few resources for the important functions or deciding, understanding, memorizing, inhibited, and recalling. The brain organizes as a principle because if you have something that you became close, that problem is there's something that be rewarded, and something that your brain recognizes as aroused, they can be threatened. And this is some behavior that you can see that we go to reward system or threaten system. When the limbic system is over aroused by real or perceived dangers, or alertness is heightened as the fight or flight response kicks in, and our ability to perform habitual behaviors is enhanced. However, the brain's functioning is impaired in the significant ways, like the limbic response reduce resources available from the cortex, prefrontal cortex. With less glucose and oxygen available, the complex maps in your prefrontal cortex required more conscious process do not function as they should. Your pre-existing limitations get worse. The threat response decrease wider perception, cognitions, creativity, and collaboration also. We have a reduced ability to clearly see issues, solve problems, and work with others. We tend to get tuned vision, focusing in on problems and details. In other words, a threat reaction can have big implications in our brain. You can see here, like in the model that Dr. David Rock described in 2008, that in the brain there is a lot of more physical real estate given to threat. We all towards and we run away. The limbic system fires up far from intensely when it perceives dangers compared to when it senses a reward. Because the arousal from a danger also comes from us on faster, lasts longer, and this is harder to budget. Even the strongest toward emotion is unlikely to make it you run, whereas fear can get you moving in instead because the threat response is quicker than the reward response. So you can see here that when we have fight or flight fight response, it's increase our motor functions, reduce field of view, reduce working memory, reduce insights. Our tendency is to generalize threats, and most of the time error or the side of pessimism is increased in our brain. Because our brain is really social, we can see some behaviors or functions that we can have in any brain in our society. As we have seen, the brain has two function states that we mentioned before. One is toward and the other one is away. When you feel a toward emotion, you see more options, choices, opportunities, and can receive or take in more informations. In other words, it is easier for you to create new wiring. The opposite is true also for away emotion. You see fewer, or if any, options, choice, opportunities, and your abilities to receive information is more limited. In other words, it is much harder to create new hiring. The big surprise is that in the brain, social threat and reward are treated with some intensity as physical threat or rewards. The SCARF model that you can see here, the acronym, is summary of important discovery from neuroscience about the way we interact socially. So this model is built on three central ideas. The first one is the brain threats many social threats and rewards with the same or even great intensity as physical threats and rewards. The second, the capacity to make decisions, solve problems, and collaborate with others is generally reduced by the threat response and increase under reward response. And the third one is the threat response is more intense and more common and often needs to be carefully and minimized in social interactions. The purpose of the SCARF model is to provide an easy way to remember and therefore act upon the social triggers that can generate both the toward and away responses. This is important in the workplaces, as the brain details with the workplaces first and foremost as a social system. The SCARF model is made up of 5 domains: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. These 5 domains have been shown to active the same primary reward circuit that physical rewards like money, activity, or the same primary threat circuits that physical threats like pain, etc. Understanding these 5 domains as primary needs helps individuals and leaders better navigate social environment in the workplace. So, status less than or better than others. For instance, we desire status because it's significant that others values us, that we have a place of importance in the group and therefore are connected to the group. Matt Lieberman designed this status to the brain an extremely important resource. Your brain is constantly monitoring your status in any group. The other thing is certainty, ability to predict outcomes. The brain likes to know what is going on by recognizing patterns in the world, likes to think ahead and picture the future, mapping out how things will be, not just for each moment, but also for the longer term. You can see this in the book Your Brain at Work from David Rock. The other thing is autonomy. The autonomy is a sense of control, a perception of reduced autonomy. For example, because of being micromanaged, for instance, can easily generate a threat response. Presenting people with options or allowing them to organize their own work and set their own hours provokes a much less stress response. Autonomy is the experience of having choice. When an individual feels there is some choice in a given situation, then they are more likely to experience toward emotions. The other one we can mention is relatedness, in group or out groups. Social connections are easily the original internet, for instance, connection different pockets of intelligence to make each pocket more than it would otherwise be by itself. Relatedness is about whether you consider a person or a friend or foe. When you connect with people you like or you can trust, you get a decrease in the stress hormone, cortisol, and in the injection of the feel good hormone, dopamine. In other words, you experience more toward emotions. When you meet someone you don't trust or start to feel more the way emotion, there is an increase in cortisol and possibly adrenaline. If the other person is considered a major threat, for instance, you increase adrenaline. And the last one is the fairness. perception of fair exchange. The extent to which employees perceive decision to be fair in their place of work can account for more than 20% of the difference in their productivities. Everyone likes to feel that they have been dealt with in a fair manner. When we feel that we have been treated unfairly, for example, in a pay review, we experience away emotions such as disappointment, anger, disillusionment, or frustrations. When we are treated fairly, for example, receiving more than we expected in a pay review, we feel toward emotions such as joy, happiness, motivation, and commitment. Let's talk about a little bit more about emotional intelligence. In this process, we can see that emotional intelligence is a concept unused to describe complex human capacities that involves the ability to regulate impulses, empathize with others, persist to be resilient in the face of obstacles. Emotional intelligence can be understood as the ability of an individual to recognize their own feelings and those of others, to motivate to cope well with the emotions individually and in relationships. So this is overall about emotional intelligence, and I'd like to share some thoughts about emotional regulations. Emotional regulations is the hour is to prepare to minimize threat and maximize rewards. We have also seen that a threat response impacts perception, cognitions, creativities, and collaborations. We just saw this in my explanation about SCARF model. Therefore, helping people to regulate these emotions is one of the most significant ways we can support their development. There are several ways to minimize our limbic system's arousal and to support them to dampen down a limbic response if it is triggered. Jamie Gross process model for emotional regulation that you can see here in the picture shows these options. At the broadest level, we can distinguish between antecedent strategies, things we do before the emotional response has kicked in, and response focused strategy when the things we do after an emotion is already underway. So, antecedent situation is how we can select, how is the process of selection situation, approaching or avoiding certain situations. So, to promote the emotion you want to have, like you can avoid the emotions you don't want to have, or you can do a situation modification, like tailoring a situation to modify its emotional impact, or putting attention deployment using the select which of the many aspects of situation you focus on. The other thing is response focus. We can also do an options for dealing with a strong emotion when we are expressions or suppressions or a cognitive changes. So it's the three areas that we can work with. Expressions, when we have a feeling and expression to these emotions. Suppression, when we are hiding our emotional response. And the cognitive change, when we selecting different perspective and of an event that passed. So, expression the emotions, whether positive or not, can be more effective, but may also result in them getting stuck in the drama of a situations. Furthermore, it may be not the appropriate depending on the situations, and it also can make others uncomfortable. So when we are thinking about, for instance, emotional regulation, that we're thinking about suppression, what they are feeling requires holding the feeling down and masking the emotions. For example, they are angry with their boss and attempt to hide that they are angry. This can actually lead to more arousal of the limbic system and the creation of bad memories. Furthermore, studies show that other people can generally sense when we are suppressing our emotion, and it can make them uncomfortable also. The other thing is the cognitive change is where the people is more likely to add value. There are three ways to create cognitive change and regulate the arousal of the limbic system: labeling, reappraisal, and direct experience. The labeling is when the limbic system becomes aroused, the resource available for your prefrontal cortex decrease. They are diverted to fuel the limbic system. However, this works the way to increasing the arousal of the prefrontal cortex can dampen down the arousal of the limbic system. It's similar to using a dimmer switch between two brain regions. One way to use this switch is to help the coachee think of the right words to identify an emotional sensation. It's a technique that is called symbolic labeling. Numerous studies also show that speaking about an emotional experience does bring the emotions back to the surface. The key to managing arousal is how you do it. To reduce arousal, you need to use just a few words to label the emotions, and ideally use symbolic language, which means using direct metaphors, metrics, and simplifications of your experience. This requires you to activate your prefrontal cortex, which reduce the arousal of the limbic systems. The reappraisal is a series of studies that shows that reappraisal generally has a stronger effect than labeling. Thus, it's a tool to reducing the impact of bigger emotion hits. Other words used to describe reappraisal are reframing or recontextualizing. Basically, reappraisal is the ability to see a situation differently, most likely in more positive light or in a way that you give us greater understanding for the situations. The last one, direct experience, is not just a relaxation process. Another study conducted by Dr. Yi Yung Tang was designed to see whether direct experience was just a form of relaxation training or if something else was at work. 40 volunteers underwent 5 days of training for 20 minutes a day using a technique Tank calls integrative body mind training. Another group did relaxation training for the same period. There were significant relaxation training for the same period. There were differences between the two groups. The direct experience group had almost 50% greater immune functions or on the average. Cortisol levels were also lower in the direct experience group. This clearly showed that the direct experience is more than a just relaxations. So people who had not practiced noticed that these pets were more likely to automatically take the default narrative path. So, as a resume, that we can see that labeling what's the energy, emotion, or feeling this brings up is just a word or two. If you would name your emotion in one or two words, what you would be. This is some exercise that you can have. The other things, reappraisal. Reappraisal can be divided in some categories that you can repositioning, reprioritizing distances, and reframing. This is the one thing that you can consider to load each of these types of reappraisal. Place that you might place from the your prefrontal cortex. So this slide can show you that emotion regulations, that if you do suppression or reappraisal, the results can be much more in a good way if you do reappraisal instead of doing suppressions. We learn to do more suppressions, but reappraisal is much more effective. You can see the hue of emotions. To do labeling and reappraisal, it's easy when you recognize and see the wheel of emotions. So you can see that the first signs of your emotions in this slide, if you can start recognizing that when you have, for instance, annoyance, the next step is anger, and the next step will be rage. So when you can see some subtle signs that you are annoyed, you can see if you not do labeling or reappraisal or others, you can see that you can go further in your emotion, and normally these emotions could be in the direction that you're not prepared to be. So this is the easy way that you can control and be more conscious about your emotions. So this is the part that we can see self-awareness. What makes you happy? What gives you pleasure? What makes you angry? Identify three things that you like about yourself. When you are in your best mood, what you are doing, which things you struggle to deal with. Identify three things you don't like about yourself and what you should do for change. So with self-awareness, we are capable to manage what we know about ourselves. And the EQI is the best tool, the best measure that we can see and we can interpret about ourselves, about a lot of emotional signs that we can get. So when we're talking about cognitive intelligence, and that's we can see that emotion quotient is responsible for 27 to 47 success of our work. So the power of emotional intelligence is implying that is then something that is we can manage our perception about ourselves. The one of the things that we think is very important is when we think about our well-being or our happiness. The happiness, it does not directly contribute to your total score of, you can see here, the wheel of emotional intelligence that we can see. But well-being is the indicator of emotional health instead of being of sub-range of any particular area. So here in the emotional intelligence, we can see five domains that we can work with. The first one is self-perception. Most of you, I think, is very familiar with that. And we have three components that we can see below of each of domains. The other one is self-expression, interpersonal relationships, decision-making process, and stress management. What we focus the most is about to start with happiness, because emotional happiness is regarding when we have emotional awareness, we can recognize, understand their own emotions. It includes us to ability to distinguish the subtitles or emotion that it appears for us in the same moment, that can cause us of impact and put us in the limbic systems or not. Acatu Institute survey, it's the one Brazilian one that we know here, that we work about happiness, that happiness has more to do with the physical and emotional well-being instead of financial aspect or ownership of some assets. So we are now going into the some domains that we work. It belongs to the well-being or the happiness parts or in the EQI inventory measures. So self-esteem is very important. So the survey show us that these four items, like a self-esteem, it's very important because the respect yourself, understanding and accept your own strengths and weakness. It's very associated with the feelings of the strength and self-confidence. When the people have low self-esteem, normally the person can feel not confident, and this can be affected uh, his interactions and his life. The other thing is self actualizations. Is when we try to evolve consciously and to engage in the search of relevant and meaningful personal goals that lead to a full and enjoyable life. When we have low, that give us in the meaningless life, unsure where to go in the life. And if you have high self actualizations, uh, energize us more, motivated more, and we can be more spiritual in our lives. The other one is self interpersonal relationship. It's the ability to develop and maintain mutually satisfying relationship that are characterized by trust and compassion. When we have low interpersonal relationship, normally we are not interested in relationship. We are not able to share feelings and create a relationship with intimacy. When we have high interpersonal relationship, is the ability to establish mutual satisfies relationship, and we normally we see more social in the positive way and create more well-being for us. And the last one is optimism. When we have positive attitude, indicator, and perspective of an individual's life, it involves remain hopeful and resilient even in the face of any setbacks. When the optimism is low, we have more fears, and we became more pessimists. And normally, the way we deal with the future is being seen more in more difficult way. When we have high optimism, the positive attitude toward diversity and confidence for the future, and we see more possibilities. So, to finalize this presentation, I'd like to say for you that understanding your brain, you can understand how your brain push you or from the prefrontal cortex or from the limbic system. And because the brain is more social, we can understand if we are towards or uh, away from the scarf model. If you how we can treat the scarf model, put our relationships in the threats way or in the more reward model, and also understand how we can understand emotional intelligence, we can activate consciously how we can regulate emotions. And regulate emotions comes from also about understanding our brain and neuroscience, doing reappraisal instead of suppressions. And to finalize, I'd like to share with you one video about happiness.
In the last 6 months, more than 1,000 books have been published about it. Universities around the world are teaching on it. For 30 years, scientists have been studying it. Governments are appointing cabinet positions to oversee it. The United Nations named an official day after it. Google Analytics prove people are searching for it. In fact, it's one of humanity's oldest pursuits. Happiness. We are wealthier, more educated, and live longer than any previous generation. And as a nation, the US is one of the wealthiest, most powerful, and technologically advanced. And in the most recent World Happiness Report, the United States ranked 17th. And during the Great Depression, when there was little to be happy about, we were actually 18% less depressed than we are now. We have been taught that hard work equals success, which equals happiness, right? Wrong. Research proves happiness is actually a precursor to success, not the other way around. Did you know? Neuroscience proves that we are hardwired to perform at our best when we are happy. Studies show that happy, positive, optimistic people earn higher incomes, set and achieve more aggressive goals, experience less stress, remain calm in high-pressure situations, are more energetic, recover from illness faster, and live longer. Happiness is serious business. When we engage in positive, real-life relationships, our bodies release chemicals that actually help reduce anxiety and increase concentration and focus. How you feel and your attitude toward life all stem from your thoughts, actions, and where you focus your time and energy. Yet we are constantly surrounded by negativity. If we want things to change, we have to create the change. And we start by choosing positivity and happiness. Just imagine the possibilities if there were more happy and positive people in this world. A world with more peace, optimism, and compassion is possible. Like a pebble thrown into a pond, it only takes one to create the ripple of happiness. Happiness is so contagious and infectious that one positive person can spread happiness to more than 1,000 people. That means all it takes to create change on a local, regional, state, country, global scale is one person. And research shows that just by spreading happiness, you actually become happier. You can choose happiness and choose to share it. You can be the catalyst to spread it directly and indirectly. Are you that one? It starts with you, yet it's bigger than you. Happiness is bold. It is courageous, audacious, and challenging. You have the power to choose happiness and to spread it. Join the movement. Share the movement. Be the one who makes the difference. And live happy.
So thank you.
And thank you, Adriana. Thank you for walking us through this informative and engaging presentation. I'd like to thank everyone that was on the call today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I hope you got something out of today's presentation. Have a great rest of your day.